Stephen Webster did, in fact, testify at Charlie Adelson's trial. That was my mistake. You guys were quick to point that out. I appreciate it. And that's the beauty of YouTube is I can say things and you guys in real time can give me feedback. And, I have too many cases to keep straight in my head. And that's why I rely on you guys. You guys are great. I try to get to as many of the comments as I can. The feedback really helps me understand what you guys are thinking, what I got wrong, what I got right, what I can improve on for future videos. So, in my last video, I had mistakenly said that Stephen Webster had not testified at all. He did, in fact, testify at Charlie's trial, but he did not testify at Donna's trial. Now, the question is, will Stephen Webster testify at a potential Wendi trial? So I went back and I watched his testimony from Charlie's trial. And I think it bears out my larger point, which is that his testimony was relatively short. It was, I think, less than 15 minutes. The interviews that Webster has given on the podcasts are often an hour and a half long, and they're very informative. They're very good. I think Webster is a very stand-up guy. He brings a lot of value to the story and illustrating what happened and telling his story of how he came to be involved with it. But I don't think that all of that is going to come into evidence at a trial. What do I mean by that? Well, at Charlie's trial, there was some very general questions from Georgia Kappelman about Webster's background, how he came to be involved in the case. And Georgia asked him a question about whether attorneys in Florida have a duty to act in an ethical manner, which he said they do. And then Dan Rashbaum asked him a couple of questions on cross-examination about whether or not he was aware of whether or not Dan Markel had been held in contempt of court in the family law proceedings, and whether or not, or what was Stephen Webster's practice area. And he was illustrating that Stephen Webster was not really a family law attorney, and that was not his primary practice area. But there was no testimony about the allegations of financial fraud. And there was certainly no testimony about the fact that Stephen Webster got a call from the pediatrician's office after Dan Markel's murder. And Webster talking in the interviews and the podcasts about how strange that was that Wendi is a week after the murder, just trying to change the kids' pediatricians from Tallahassee to Miami as if nothing had happened. And it's very strange, but can that get into evidence at trial? I think that would be hearsay. It's an out of court statement. It's a statement made by a pediatrician, not by Stephen Webster. The pediatrician's office is not there to testify. I think that would be excluded. Okay, what about the allegations of financial fraud? Well, here's where it gets a little bit dicey. The defense would argue, well, it's irrelevant or it's unduly prejudicial. What does unduly prejudicial mean? Well, if something bad happened to this defendant at some point in time, and now you're bringing that in to try to cast them in a negative light and say, well, they did this bad act at one point in time, therefore they're a bad person and they probably did this other thing too that we're now making them stand on trial for. How does this tie in to Wendi? So the defense would argue, well, was Wendi ever was there ever a finding by any court that Wendi had committed perjury? No. Was there anything ever filed in court that Wendi had committed perjury? No. Was there ever any investigation by the Florida bar regarding whether or not Wendi had filed a false affidavit to the court? No. Now, we all know why. It's because there was never an opportunity to, because Dan Markel was murdered. So there's a reason. But regardless, the defense is going to say there was never a finding. All we have essentially is Stephen Webster's word. That's very speculative. Obviously, Stephen Webster is going to advocate on behalf of his client, but there was never a finding by a court. And they're also going to say it's irrelevant. What is the relevance to whether or not Wendi maybe or maybe not lied about her assets? The counter again is, well, that goes to the motive. The motive to the murder was that her ex-husband was about to accuse her of something which could cost her her ability to lose her law license. And now her ex-husband can no longer make that accusation because he's dead. And that even doesn't even get into all the text messages where she texted Dan on the day of the murder, where she said essentially, "Nice, it's been fun." What does that mean? But focusing on Stephen Webster, I think Stephen Webster can be a very strong witness for the state, but I think there are potential pitfalls. One of them being the fact that the defense is going to fight like hell to keep out as much of his testimony as possible and to try to really keep it very, very narrow. And I think a lot of the information he gave on the podcasts, which in all our minds is leading us to believe that Wendi is guilty as hell, and that's probably right. But I don't think all that is going to come into evidence. And the second thing that the state has to contend with is to make sure that Webster's testimony lines up with what he said on the podcast. Because if Webster makes the mistake that I made about Stephen Webster and says, "Oh, well, Stephen Webster never testified, and in fact, he had testified," well, you better believe the defense is going to take every word and pick apart every word Webster said on every podcast. And if they find any little contradiction, they're going to try to use that to impeach his credibility. So I think the state wants to make sure they have this airtight. And I think Georgia Kappelman and Catherine Dugan, now that she unfortunately did not get the judgeship, I think she probably would have been a terrific judge. But she's also a great prosecutor. So a loss to the bench, but a gain for the state's attorney's office. So those are the things I think that the state is reviewing. I think they're going over all of Stephen Webster's interviews in great detail. They're combing through it, making sure that they have everything airtight. And that's what I think is what's going on and why Wendi has not yet been indicted. So that's my postscript. Again, Webster did testify, but I think it's going to be very, very limited scope if he testifies at Wendi's trial. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That's it for now, and we'll see everybody next time. And wishing everybody, of course, before I forget, a very happy Thanksgiving. I'm thankful to have started this channel, to be engaged with a great community. We're small, but we're growing, and I'm very thankful for all of you. It sounds cliche, but it's not. It's been a lot of fun, and I think we all have a lot to be thankful for in our lives. So take the time, spend it with your family, take off from work, enjoy the holiday, and we'll see everybody next time.